John Wick is a stuntman movie. The John Wick movies are directed by Chad Stahelski, who you may know as Keanu Reeves' stunt double from The Matrix, or as Keanu Reeves' wife's boyfriend from The Matrix 4.
This is my husband, Chad.
Or Nemesis 2, maybe? The John Wick movies are directed by Chad Stahelski, who you may know as the director of the John Wick movies, and purely as a spectacle of action stunt work. Yeah, pretty good I suppose, not bad. But as an action fan I want more, and the sad man dog revenge stuff is just the right amount of character and motivation for a movie like this. You just need enough to make sure that the audience is on the action man's side when he goes on his vengeance-fueled killing spree, and the dead dog is like Arnie feeding the deer. It's just what you need, and it's out of the way fast. And then they ruin it. The first problem is in the famous nightclub scene. The whole story revolves around taking revenge on this man for killing the dog. But this is where that ends. Wick looks at the man he wants to kill and just decides not to. It could have all been over, but he chooses to keep killing all these random people. He lets his friend live, I suppose that's nice. Then he lets his target live. I get that the movie has to happen, but maybe come up with a reason for him to live. Maybe someone else takes the bullet and gives him time to escape. Maybe there's bulletproof glass. Anything other than John Wick just deciding to extend his killing spree. This is where John Wick ceases to be a relatable, supportable character. John Wick is now the villain, and that really damages this film. Of course, we're working on action movie morality here. The sort of morality where taking revenge for your dog being killed by killing dozens of people is perfectly reasonable. But that is still a consistent moral system, which this contravenes. If he needs to take revenge, he needs to take revenge. But when he chooses not to take revenge, he loses all relatability. So that scene does fatal damage to the character. The next scene that provides a major problem is outside the church. John Wick has raided the church, burned the money and the blackmail material. John Wick goes onto a rooftop overlooking a car park where the main antagonist and his henchmen arrive. He has the element of surprise, but he doesn't do anything clever, and that's what I want from John Wick. I want him doing impressive things, using impressive weapons, using the environment around him to his advantage, especially when he has the opportunity to plan in advance. He shouldn't just be relying on being the ultimate gunman. It's an empty scene, there's really nothing to it. John Wick walks up with a gun and starts shooting people, and that's the end of the scene. And this really shows how little they can do with the character of John Wick. He doesn't use any of his special skills or his experience. He doesn't set up the situation in advance or use a special weapon or anything like that. But of course the real problem is what happens at the end of this scene. One of the criminal gang realises that John Wick is immune to bullets, and so he goes after him with a car, knocking him unconscious. It seems strange that the greatest assassin in the world doesn't have basic situational awareness, and that it's apparently easier to incapacitate him with a car than with a gun. I think it would be much easier to dodge a car than a bullet, and this is long before he gets his bulletproof suit. But the big problem with this scene is that it completely destroys the plot of the movie, because of what happens next when John Wick has been knocked unconscious. What happens is that they tie him to a chair. By this point he has killed probably dozens of their men, and they don't immediately execute him. The boss is there because John Wick is dedicated to killing his son and destroying his business. He just did serious damage to the business. He's obviously going to kill as many of them as he can. He's already decided that continuing his killing spree is the most important thing to him, well above the revenge he's meant to be after, and so they need him dead. And they need him dead during the brief window when he's incapable of killing them instead. So they tie him to a chair and wait for him to wake up. And that destroys the entire movie. There are no stakes anymore. The first time I watched this movie, I didn't know there would be sequels. It isn't a foregone conclusion that an action hero will survive a vengeance-fueled killing spree, but after he survives a situation like that, it's clear that he can't be stopped by anything because the writers just won't allow it. And that's the worst way to do a plot. Writer fiat should be kept down as far as possible. The character should survive through his own established merits, not through other people acting out of character. So John Wick wakes up, and he's not in the afterlife, he's just in a chair. He's tied to it as if that means anything. And the villain, I suppose he's the villain, monologues for a while and then leaves, leaving two men armed with a plastic bag to eliminate the world's greatest assassin. This existential threat isn't important enough for him to stay and make sure it happens. Just leave it up to the mooks. Obviously that goes about as well as you'd expect. These might seem like small problems in a full-length movie full of pleasing action scenes, but for me this is terminal. If people don't act as people should, if your protagonist isn't sympathetic, if your plot doesn't make sense, if your protagonist is literally invincible, no amount of action can save the film.